This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to In or Out, a rapid-fire game where we discuss a handful of NBA topics and determine where we stand. Now that the Cavs season is over, it's officially off-season time. The rumor mill has already been spinning. It didn't take long for some chaos to start. We had reports from a number of different sources emerge right away as soon as the final buzzer sounded, and we've had everything from some trade rumors to potentially some dirty laundry being aired out, and I thought, what better way to go through all of this than with my two co-hosts, Jackson Flickinger and Corey Walsh. How are you two doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on again, Tony.
Can't believe we made the off-season cut. I thought for sure Tony was going solo.
Well, how did you guys enjoy the off-season?
Well, it was a cool 2 minutes. I really enjoyed it. I felt like the happiest I've ever felt in a 4-1 series loss. And then, somehow a 2,000-word article was just published out of nowhere. Definitely wasn't sitting on that for a while.
Honestly, we could have just rolled it over and just kept recording last night. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time. But yeah, here we are.
We ended the live stream like right as all the good stuff came out. So that was unfortunate. But you know what? It was a fun 2 minutes in that off season where it felt like I remember thinking Cavs Twitter seems oddly optimistic. What could possibly go wrong right now? To be honest though, I don't think the reports were as awful as they seemed at first. And so we're going to get into all that today. We're going to dive into all this. And I want to start off with the Darius Garland topic of the day. And I'm just going to read off the report from yesterday. Quote, rival executives believe the Cavs will have to seriously evaluate the fit of Mitchell and Garland and ultimately may have to choose one or the other. Should Mitchell decide to stay long-term, sources briefed on the matter say Garland's representation, Clutch Sports CEO Rich Paul, would have a conversation with the Cavs on potentially finding a new home for the one-time All-Star. In other words, if Mitchell commits long-term, which we're going to discuss later, it's possible the Cavs or Garland's own camp will push for the backcourt to be split. Jackson and Corey, are you in or out on this report?
I am in on this. I think that I haven't really been buying into this construction of the team for a while, and I think it's easier to talk yourself into Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland as a pairing than it is, I think, Mobley and Allen. But I think it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. You have 2 point guards, you have 2 centers, and they both need the ball in their hands. We've had 2 years of them needing to work off ball and not really showing any improvements there. I was optimistic that with the Cavs winning 18 out of 20 and a lot of those coming without Darius Garland on the court, that maybe he would buy in more to a more off-ball role and kind of meld his game to what was working for the team when he was out. But that didn't really happen, and Donovan got hurt shortly thereafter. So there was an opportunity for Darius to kind of fit into what the Cavs were doing, or at least to what Donovan Mitchell was doing, and try to fit his game around him, and that just never really transpired. And you could talk yourself into a new coach potentially getting them to fit together, but I think it's probably at this point just best to rip the Band-Aid off if Donovan is staying long-term.
I agree that it's probably smart for the Cavs to do it. Where I draw questions though is Darius's perspective, because in reality, Tony and I were kind of talking about this before, but it's pretty much assumed that Darius wants to be the primary option wherever he goes. But I think we've kind of learned through his stretch with the Cavs that he's not necessarily the player that a team can kind of rely on. And I don't know if the teams that are even looking to acquire him would probably even view him in that same way either. In all of his best fits, he's never going to be the number one option. You see him always projected to go to the Pelicans. He wouldn't be the number one ball handler there. That's already there with Zion, pretty much runs the show. And if not, McCollum does. And then if it's Orlando, that's Paolo. We kind of saw in the postseason, the whole offense runs through their wings. Whether or not that's because they don't have a real point guard there is a point that could be valid there. But also San Antonio is a very popular spot, but we've already seen that they're probably just going to lean heavy into the Wembanyama thing. So I don't even know where Darius could go that I would view as his ideal fit for not only himself, like the team, but especially if he's going into it being like, I want to run this the way that I did in like 2021, because I don't know if that situation's really going to ever come anymore for him.
Maybe on a lottery team. That's not to say that Darius can't take a team to the play-in or even a 6 or 7 seed, but, well, 7 seed would still be the play-in, but you get what I'm saying. I think really he's going to end up, from his perspective, from his camp's perspective, if you trade him from Cleveland, the ultimate reality is he's going to end up in a situation where he needs a volume scorer next to him, whether it's a Donovan Mitchell or a Zion or a Wembanyama. Darius is not a number one guy, and so I get why his camp is going to try and push him as the guy and get the most out of him. But from that perspective, I think I'm out on that idea for him. The idea of splitting Mitchell and Garland up, I think, is interesting. I don't know if I could say I'm in or out on it. I'm very conflicted. I agree with a lot of what Jackson said. I do want to push back a little bit because I think the Garland Mitchell fit is better than it gets credit for sometimes. Like, it's not Trae Young and DeJounte Murray where neither one of them wants to play without the ball. It's very clear that this doesn't work. I think we've seen stretches where they've both been very successful together. I think that both of them are willing and capable to play without the ball. I think there's a clear argument to be made that a better coach and a better offense would unlock that. But if your argument is you want to just rip the Band-Aid off because you don't think it'll fit, I think that's fair enough. I can see that like that being a good idea just to get it out of the way because we have a big enough sample size of it not being perfect that maybe it's time to switch it up. I think regardless, this core, you probably switch up something, whether it's the front court or the back court, maybe both. But I do want to just push back slightly because I think Garland and Mitchell fit better than they've gotten credit for. It's not a perfect fit. It's not seamless. But I do think, again, from Garland's perspective, you need a Donovan Mitchell type of player next to him. And for Mitchell, up until really that stretch in January and December, he needed a player like Garland next to him to set the table and be that selfless playmaker. Unless you think Mitchell is going to be a point guard full time moving forward, you're going to need someone like Garland next to him. And so I think that's where things get interesting.
It's tough because, like, I do get what you're saying with you need another playmaker around Mitchell, but ideally you don't have two guys who can't create for themselves in any capacity on a team. And I think if you kind of alleviate that front court problem, you sort of alleviate the need for like a super creator, because somebody who can create their own shot off the dribble and does have the ability to find guys on the perimeter and is a good passer in the sense that he can make the passes. Like, I think that's kind of all you need in a modern offense. You don't need somebody to, like, I'm going to set up like this play or like set this up. Like, it's not 1995. It's not 2005. Like, your best player needs to be able to run an offense. And if they can't run an offense, then you're looking at like a DeMar DeRozan type player who is really limited in the sense of how he's able to impact winning.
I think something that the camp of Darius and maybe Darius Garland in general should kind of keep in mind is that I don't know why Donovan Mitchell, honestly, he makes Darius Garland's life a lot easier. He makes defenses have to focus on someone else other than him. And if Darius, this is like, I feel like, aggregating to the extreme, that saying that he wants it to be his show kind of thing. But if that's the angle that they're kind of leaning towards, that we've seen versions of a Darius Garland central offense. We saw it struggle in the play-in. We saw how when teams attack him, the offense around him can just collapse, even though it wasn't a great supporting cast in that iteration of the Cavs either. But I think Darius needs to be like in that secondary role in order to play at his best. He can't be the focal point where defenses just trap him and then he's kind of removed from the game entirely. We've seen that he can't really handle those yet. And to think that the postseason plan for wherever Darius goes is, all right, well, we trap him and neutralize him, and then what can he do? Because like Jackson said, he's pretty limited around the glass. And his shot, as we saw through game 4 and 5, like if his shot's not falling, he's a net zero on offense.
I think Tony's point about them kind of fitting better than people give them credit for, and I think it's because their skill sets naturally line up really well. And I think that's why, like, when I think about their best game, I still go back to that Celtics game in 2022. Like, October or November, like the first regular season game that they played, that wasn't the game that Darius like got his eye cut. They both really fed off each other well, and I think there's just like a natural chemistry built in with their skill sets, but that never developed, and it's just like that needs to be a 10 out of 10 to kind of justify a small backcourt that can both get trapped like that both have problems with, like, you'd like to put Donovan Mitchell on the worst of your opposing backcourt, but now you have to put him on like one of the better ones because you have Darius Garland that you have to put on the worst. So it's just you're creating a lot of holes elsewhere, and it's not worth it if it's not like a seamless fit.
Yeah, and to round out the discussion here, I think one thing that I do want to say, because I see this talking point a lot, I obviously they are vulnerable defensively with the two undersized guards, but I don't think that has been the issue for them. It's much more on the offensive end if you're going to poke holes in that. And the last thing I'll say, I think if you look at this playoffs, this postseason as an example, there were so many opportunities for them to play off of each other. Garland just didn't have it. You look at all the great games Mitchell had and all the opportunities Garland had sprinkled in there to take over and be the man in the stretches where Mitchell needed him to help. Garland has a all-star caliber season that we know he's capable of, even like last year. I know the playoffs went different for many other reasons than what we saw this year, but I think that the potential for them to be a really, really good duo was there this season. Garland just had the worst season he's had in a long time. So if the decision is to split them up, I completely understand that reasoning. I just also see the perspective of maybe keeping him around because I think there's something here. Again, this isn't, I always use the Hawks as the example. This isn't like Murray and Young where that just doesn't work. It's very clear that doesn't work. These two guys, I think, are willing and capable to play off of each other. They just haven't fully unlocked that. Maybe a different coach does it. Maybe it's Darius Garland just having a bounce back year.
If you put Murray and Young in place of Mitchell and Garland on the Cavs, how good is this team?
I don't think they make the playoffs. They probably make a play-in team.
You don't think they make the playoffs with Mobley and Allen?
No.
I mean,
I don't think so.
I
mean, look at how bad this Cavs team was without Mitchell. I think Mitchell is just so much better than both of those guys alone. I don't like even if you just removed Mitchell, I don't think this team makes the playoffs.
People are way too down on Trae Young.
I think it's kind of fair though. I do.
I mean, I don't think it's as fair as people are saying, but that's fine.
Okay.
We don't need to. We don't need to go into it. It's not a Hawks podcast, but
I mean, listen. Just in case there's a Hawks fan listening, I wouldn't be surprised in very random hypothetical
sorry you ended up here.
In that hypothetical you gave, if they did make the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised. But I just don't think – I think the sum of Garland and Mitchell is a lot higher than the sum of Young and Murray.
I think that Young is really good, and I think if you put if you put Mobley and Allen around Young, that'd be a really good team. And DeJounte Murray's just kind of hanging out, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. But this is a good way because listen, I think Mitchell is just so much better than them. That's my main reasoning here. I think he is just clearly a league above both of those guys. So it's a good way to transition into the other half of the backcourt because this was the most important detail that was shared with us last night. I think I'll read the quote again. The Mitchell situation will be resolved this summer. And there is growing sentiment around the league that the Cavs will be able to position themselves to receive his commitment for a lucrative contract extension that would keep Mitchell in Cleveland past his 30th birthday. Now, the story goes on to say that all indicators point towards winning being the most important thing for Mitchell. And I would go as far as to say that the Cavs give him the best or among the best chance of doing that. Corey, we'll start with you. Are you in or out on Mitchell signing that extension this summer?
I would say in because even if Mitchell doesn't want to stay long-term, it's just not a smart move on his end overall to turn down the extra $70 million or so he would get by signing with Cleveland versus somewhere else. Especially in the landscape of today's NBA, we see these types of situations all the time where players will sign their max contract and everyone's like, oh my God, nice, he signed. Didn't see that coming. And then season or two later, it's like, all right, now that I got the money kind of locked in here, I'm going to look elsewhere. Do I think Mitchell's going to do that? Not necessarily. I feel like the Cavs overall, because the reality of the situation is wherever Mitchell goes, he's going to be weakening the depth of wherever he's going, because it's going to take a price to bring Mitchell over, even if it's publicly known that Mitchell wants out. Teams are still clamoring for that type of player. Franchises get desperate for this type of player. And I think for Mitchell to extend with Cleveland would be the smartest move in the short term and the long term. Short term for the team building aspect of it, and in the long term for his financial gain.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're the Cavs, you're in on it. I don't know. It's really tough to put your mind to try to figure out what Mitchell wants to do, because we don't really know Mitchell that much. Like, we think we know him. You know, we've seen him talk, but we don't really know. We don't exactly. We don't really know what he wants. But I think the landscape isn't really great for him right now, just because the West is really tough. There's no I wouldn't want to go out West if you wanted to win. And the teams in the East, like, I don't think the Cavs are trading him to the Magic. So if you're not getting traded to the Magic, then, well, if you got traded to the Magic, basically it would be the Cavs 2.0 that you just went through. So it's like, I don't really see a great pathway for Mitchell outside of Cleveland. And I think that the Cavs are willing to give him power within the organization. They're going to try to make everything revolve around him. And I don't know if the Jazz were ever truly comfortable with doing that. And I think that's something that appeals to him. And, you know, I think he believes in Mobley, a fellow Adidas guy. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but, you know, so it's like, I think I could see why Mitchell would want to stay, but it's just really tough for me to try to get into his head.
Yeah, and I agree. It's impossible to know what he might be thinking. I wouldn't be too surprised by any outcome this summer, but if we are to believe the report that winning is the most important thing, I think you laid it out very well. The Cavs probably have the best shot of they're giving him all the power. I guarantee they would basically say, hey, like, what coach do you want? Do you want JB? Do you want us to look somewhere else? Do you want us to trade Darius Garland? Do you want us to trade Jarrett Allen? They'll probably bend over backwards to give Mitchell anything he thinks would be best for this team. Maybe not to the degree that like a LeBron would be able to do. But the point is that the Cavs will be able to build this team around Mitchell any way that they see fit. And I'm assuming that they will collaborate with Mitchell on that. I'm not sure there's any other team in the NBA that is willing or capable of doing that this summer, especially if he has to demand a trade, which he would. He would have to be traded. He is not eligible to be a free agent this summer. So that, again, if winning is the most important thing, what team is getting better by trading for Mitchell right now? Does New York do it? Do they even want a Mitchell Brunson backcourt? There's just a lot of questions there. And I think the most logical way for him to have a good chance of winning is just staying in Cleveland, because not to be like crazy or anything, but if they're healthy this year, they could have beat Boston. I'm not saying they would have, but they had a chance. They clearly had a chance.
People forget the Celtics suck.
Yeah, sure. But either way, they were capable. They competed in every game. There's a fighter's chance that they had of getting to the conference finals. And at that point, you're playing a decimated Knicks team or the Pacers. So this season could have looked very different if they stayed healthy. And I think if I'm Donovan Mitchell, I'm looking at that and saying, well, maybe I just run it back, retool this roster. I guess it comes down to how much does he trust Kobe to make the right moves around him.
Like, even looking at this previous offseason, like, Donovan wasn't a part of the Max Strus signing, but you look at George Niang, I think he had a pretty heavy part in that.
He might have.
No pun intended.
That's not exactly a great thing on his resume.
But in like Tyus Jones is somebody who he has a personal relationship with as well. So, like, not saying that it's smart to give somebody of Donovan Mitchell's caliber control, like, keys to the franchise, but I think the Cavs have shown that they are a willing, like, partnership with him. So that could appeal to Mitchell as well.
Yeah, I agree. And so while Mitchell might be back, there is one person who almost certainly won't be back in town. Maybe JB Bickerstaff. Fans have been calling for JB to be fired for an eternity, it feels like, but sounds like players inside the organization may have been feeling the same way. Going to read off another quote. Multiple league sources say for months that Mitchell did not have great confidence in Bickerstaff And he was not alone. Several players questioned JB's strategies, game management, practice habits, and accountability measures throughout the season. Now, I would say this actually surprised me as well, because it's not surprising that the players may have lost confidence in JB. It's surprising to me, if this was well known for months now, that JB still has his job. Because the one thing that I always gave JB credit for was, from an outside perspective, it looked like he still had the locker room on his side. If that was false and the players have been questioning him for this long, it's unfathomable to me that they didn't fire JB and get this sorted out immediately, because this goes back as far as December, it sounds like. So are you guys in or out? We can start with Jackson. Are you in or out on this report that JB has lost the locker room and probably gone, if that's the case?
Well, if you listened to our pod yesterday, I said a lot of things about how it's good that JB gets buy-in, so never listen to anything that I say. But going back to December, I think is kind of interesting. I felt that things were really bad in the November, December time. If you remember that loss to the Trailblazers at home, that was a really bad loss. And after, like, JB's press conference afterwards was about, like, 45 seconds, and he looked like he just found out that, his dog died. He looked so, like, distraught, and I thought that was it then, because, like, coaches usually tell you when they're getting fired, like, not, like, actually, but you know what I mean. So I thought that it was going to happen then, and I think he was really bailed out by the injuries and the Cavs rallying after that. So, like, it's not surprising, but it's also, like, if he lost the locker room to that much, I don't know why they didn't make the move then.
I felt like when I looked at the quotes, the thing that stood out to me was I got the impression it was the veteran players, like the ones that weren't drafted by the team, that had the issue. And I feel like that's probably why he kind of had more, it seemed like he had more buy-in, because the players who basically developed and grew under JB were probably the ones who, you don't know anything else. You knew Beeline for maybe a hot minute before it got replaced by JB. Because the way the report made it seem is like the veteran players left the practices being like, what did we just do for this amount of time? Or that he felt like he was coddling like the younger players. He viewed everything as like a stepping stone moment, but it's like there aren't stepping stone moments when you're in the position the Cavs are trying to put themselves in. It's either you're producing results or you're just not hitting the benchmarks, and not everything is wins and lessons anymore, which is something that he kind of had for the first 2 or 3 seasons, and that's what
that was a Ty Lue quote, just for the record.
Well, I thought it was good to apply here.
Great
it wasn't good, but I just want to give clarity to my boy JB.
But overall, yeah, that not surprising. If they didn't probably go through that stretch, that 18-3 stretch, 18-2 stretch, then he obviously would have been gone. But if it was up to me, I felt like that locker room definitely, and they pointed out in the article, but that Clippers loss just felt like the nail in the coffin for following any message he kind of had going forward. It was a team willingly marching off of a cliff is what it felt like.
Yeah, it's just frustrating, because I think the article even mentions that maybe this started after the Knicks loss as well. Like, some of the doubt began to creep in. And like, if that's the case, I've always said that, hey, like, if JB has the guys on his side, then I understand why they're rolling with him, even if he clearly has limitations. But if that wasn't the case, I'm really frustrated that they allowed him to survive another season. Not to say that I have anything against JB, but if you lose the locker room, there's no sense. There's no point in keeping you at that point. And so that is just incredibly frustrating if there's truth to this report.
Yeah, and it's when you think you should fire the coach, that's when you should do it. You should rip the Band-Aid off, because it's not, generally these situations don't get better, and I know that you don't want to be reactionary, and I think it's dumb to like blame the coach for something that's out of the coach's capability of fixing. Like blaming Ty Lue for a team that had nobody on it that could play basketball. Like that's stupid. But something like this, it's like, I feel like in some ways we learned everything we needed to learn from last season, and to just run it back completely with just adding Max Strus just felt unnecessary. And I feel like now we're making the changes that, instead of making incremental changes from last season, we're making full-scale changes, and I don't know if like that's just as dangerous as making no changes in some regards.
Yeah, I think in many ways we've said this a few times, but it's almost like they're just a year behind on a lot of things right now. They were a year behind getting out of the first round. Sounds like they're probably a year behind finding the right coach. And you make up a good point though. It's like now they might clean house, which is also very dangerous because there's no guarantee that a new coach will be better than JB. It's easy to forget how bad coaching can be in the NBA. JB might have felt like a train wreck at times, but he was certainly way more stable than some of the coaches that we have seen in Cleveland. Whether there's any trades, there's no guarantee that works out. So it's a tough spot to be in, and the Cavs kind of put themselves in this position. I understand all of the reasoning behind it, especially as far as keeping the core forward together. I understand that you wanted to give them a chance with a better supporting cast. The JB thing, again, if that report is true, which I believe it personally, like I think it's a reliable source. With that being said, it's just very frustrating. But moving into our last topic, that it's not really relevant to the reports, but I think we can tie it all together because during our post-game live stream last night, we did Evan Mobley a disservice by not spending more time on his performance. Now, partially that's my fault for going into a Niang rant. Jackson brought up Cedi Osman. We were all over the place, so it happens. But
the Cedi Osman was warranted.
It's always warranted. It's always warranted to bring up Cedi. But okay, so if anyone's watching, we were talking with Cedi. If anyone's watching, Corey had to go. We're wrapping up here, last topic, so we're just going to keep on rolling. We're going to talk about Evan Mobley because it was truly the closest thing to a breakout moment that I think we've gotten from Mobley, at least offensively. And to me, it solidified him as a player that the Cavs cannot afford to lose. I know we're going to be discussing offseason rumors all summer, but I think it's worth noting that the idea of trading Mobley was not mentioned in any of those reports, at least as far as I saw. It was all Allen, Garland. Is Mitchell going to stay? I think probably solidified Mobley I think it's been the case for a while now that he's a foundational piece. I don't think that's like breaking news, but I think his most recent success against Boston probably stamped him as a cornerstone right alongside Mitchell. Are you in or out on Mobley, proving that he's untouchable?
I'm in just because, like, I don't know how I feel about the phrase untouchable, but more so like Mobley is 22. He has shown he has incredible upside and he hasn't reached that, but then you see glimpses of that upside and you can talk yourself into this being a more normal occurrence if you put a team around him that makes more sense, if you force him to develop more. I talked about this in my article for Write Down Euclid right after the game, but one of the things that I feel like the Cavs have really done a disservice is forcing him to be both a center and a power forward, because he's a power forward when he's with Mobley. Sorry, he is Mobley. When he's with Allen, in the sense that now you need to develop a shot, you need to be more comfortable on the perimeter, but then he's also getting minutes as the backup center, and he spends a lot of time with a lot of like second units, and it's just kind of doesn't allow him to focus on a skill set in a way that I think would be beneficial, because he's not a 4, because he doesn't have the handle or the shooting to be a 4 right now, and he's not a 5, I think, or like not somebody who you would really like in all situations just because of his rebounding, his lack of screen setting. And part of that to me comes back to, well, we're forcing him in to do 2 very distinct roles and not allowing him just to focus on one. And I think in the playoffs, he was able to focus on just one, and you saw how good he can be. I do want to say that the Celtics are a very good matchup for Evan Mobley to show what
especially
he can do.
Porzingis.
And you saw against the Magic in the last 2 games, he wasn't scoring the last 3 games. He wasn't scoring a bunch, but he did hold his own on that end. And I think it is important to note that they never had a power forward to really play with him. So he's just kind of out there with 4 guards. And I think he did pretty good in those situations. But if you put a power forward with him, if you allow him to spend a whole summer like, hey, you're going to be a 5, hey, this is where you need to improve on, I think you can really talk yourself into like, hey, this guy was a defensive player of the year candidate the last full season he played. He's 22. Like, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you mentioned, is that if they decide to trade Allen, for example, and you have a whole summer of Mobley knowing that he's going to be the starting 5, could look very different from what we just saw, where he kind of gets tossed into the fire. And I think he did a great job in the Boston series. Again, good matchup for him, but I think he clearly showed that there's something there. There's many different pathways the Cavs can choose for rebuilding this team. Rebuilding, you know what I mean.
Retooling.
Retooling the team. I don't think any of them exclude Evan Mobley. You have to try building around him, not only because he's so dominant defensively already, but because he's still a young prospect, and whatever his offensive ceiling is, it has not been tapped into yet. Whatever it is, maybe he doesn't get much better, but we need to see an actual offense that includes him, and he is a focal point, and they want him to shoot the ball and score, because there's got to be something there, and they have not attempted to see how deep that one goes. So I think he's just, it goes without saying that he's a cornerstone.
It's just so tough for him to like do mismatch hunting when he's on the floor with Allen and there's another big just standing on the block with him. Like so much of the things that he did really well, it's hard to face up when you have another big on the block. Like, and we've seen them try to do the big to big passing. That's really tough. That's a tough pass to make. Like Donovan Mitchell can't make that pass all the time. I think Darius Garland makes it look a little too easy, but like that's a really tough pass to make, and it's really tough that like that's kind of what defenses are always going to force him to do when he's playing with another big like Jarrett Allen in those situations. And we saw that, hey, he can beat all of these guys, like all really good defenders, if you give him space. And I think that's only going to get better.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, Allen, he's a fantastic player, and I would absolutely hate to see him go this summer. It's not something that I am hoping for, but I do think there's a good chance that they split up this pairing, and it's because you have to bet on Mobley's potential. You just do. He is their ceiling in many ways still. The only concern is that the Mitchell-Mobley pairing hasn't really shown much together just yet. So if you end up putting all your chips into those two pieces, they're going to have to develop something. Both of them are capable of doing it, so it's not that much of a concern, but something to keep an eye out for.
One thing I do want to say is that if I had to, if the 2025 season was all that mattered to me, I would keep Allen over Mobley just because I think Allen's a better center right this second. Yeah. But you can't, like, as good as Allen is, you like one of the problems that the Cavs is that they haven't allowed their prospects to go through growing pains like they need to. And I think Mobley is a perfect example of this, where I'd rather lose games in November and December because you're getting beat up on the glass, or because Mobley still's trying to figure out how to be a center for 35 minutes a game. I'm okay with that, but what I'm not okay with is like stunting his growth longer just because you don't want to force him to like expand his game.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to end the episode just by saying Jarrett Allen had a fantastic season. I feel bad that the last time that we've really talked about him, because he's been injured for so long, we didn't have much of an opportunity. Feel bad the next time we bring him up, just being like, oh yeah, he's going to get traded. He was so good this year, and he is very, very helpful to this Cavs team. It's just, if you have to pick, you're going to pick Mobley.
I do want to say that people getting mad at him for not taking shots, I think is a little extreme. Like,
yeah,
I don't like if it's to that point, it's usually not something you should be playing through. So, everyone's different. We don't know the situation entirely, but I don't want to run around calling Jarrett Allen soft for not doing that.
Yeah. And just in case anyone missed that part of the report, apparently Jarrett Allen rejected an injection to help numb the pain of the rib injury he was dealing with. And I did see some people taking victory laps on that. Like, I told you Allen was soft. Like, I don't think you can take a victory lap on that. If the players were, because part of the report was that apparently members of the organization or players felt like Allen wasn't doing enough to get back out there. Like, listen, if they were saying that, then they're wrong too. They're also wrong, and it's just so stupid to argue that. Allen understands his pain tolerance more than any of us could ever guess. And if Allen couldn't play, and if he didn't want to get an injection at that stage, it's a rib injury. Like, he's a center. He's going to get hit in the ribs a lot. So I understand this.
And like, if you saw the videos of him shooting free throws before some of those Celtics games, like, it looked like he was in pain just doing this. And I'm just like,
yeah, just raising his arm. All the reports are saying that he couldn't raise his arm. He could barely sleep. I mean, I just don't blame him at all.
Right. And he played like 75 straight games or something like that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he was an Iron Man this season until.
right.
And last thing on the Allen point, it wasn't like he got hit in the ribs once. It happened twice. It happened in
Right.
game 2 and game 4, I
Five.
think. Whenever.
Four.
Game 5. Whatever.
Four.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
it happened
game
twice
5 was
in
the
the
first
same
game.
spot. And
Yeah.
so, like, yeah, I mean, I think it's silly to
It is.
try and make fun of Allen or anything. It's just because it's Jarrett Allen too, because he has that kind of soft persona. I think that he is getting more heat than other players probably would, but it is what it is. That's all for this episode of In or Out. Thank you to everyone for watching, and give a proper thank you to Corey and Jackson, although Corey left, for being here throughout the season to make this show for everything it is. If Corey ends up watching, thank you for being here. Genuinely, I mean it. That the show wouldn't be what it is without you and Jackson. And again, thanks to all the Cavs fans who have supported us along the way throughout this season. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs.